Well, I always want to remind you, my fellow gamers, that if you're having fun, you're doing it right. So please don't let my opinion take that away from you. But hype seasons are really interesting to me personally because it tends to highlight the extremes on both sides. Either you're all about a particular game or you can't stand it one bit. And it's in those times that I usually find myself in hot water, namely because I believe that there's a lot of nuance to any state of the game. And with Throne of Liberty being out in the wild now, this will act as a really good point in time to look back and see how this game fares. And do they stick with it, or do they give up like they did with Blue Protocol? Obviously a different studio, a different day, but still stings nonetheless. I don't know if you're like me, but I'm always surprised that companies are still willing to try and invest and make new MMORPGs, considering the level of risk that is involved. So let's talk about it, and let me say this video is inspired by this tweet from Mrs. Styx, wife of MMO Byte, who writes, "As an MMO enthusiast, I am a little worried to see a new free-to-play MMO that only brings in 326k for its max. Regardless of my personal feelings on the game, that is so low compared to other MMO launches within Amazon's advertising and backing, let alone being free to try." And with that, let's get into it. Hello everyone, and welcome to another State of the Game, Throne and Liberty Launch Edition. But this is also a state of the game for the MMO genre out there. That's what we do around here. We cover MMORPGs, the news. I also make guides, and occasionally we have these fun discussions from time to time. However, I do want to address one thing really quick because there's another focus that this channel has. And honestly, at the end of the day, I really do hope it saves a life. It might even be your life. I'm not really sure, but we call all that the message of hope. Now, I'm not shaming them here because it's a perfectly valid opinion because they worry about the channel and they want it to succeed. But Team Jeebus basically says 90% of people most likely don't care for that, and that does impact the watch time here at the channel. But I don't measure success the way that other content creators do, that Team Jeebus might, be thinking about. I measure it by this. So I do appreciate that we have so many new people here, and my content will always be about sharing my love of video games, especially MMORPGs. But that is just the vehicle to the real work that we're doing. Something that is so deeply needed in our world today, but we'll get to that at the end of today's video. So in the spirit of respecting your time, let's get into this topic, because if you haven't seen, Throne and Liberty is off to a strong start, or are they? And if we take a look at Mrs. Styx's opinion again, you can see here they're kind of concerned because 326,000 concurrent players isn't what we've seen in the past hype cycles. And these numbers also do not include console players. But not to be a Debbie Downing here, at some point in the future, there's going to be a dip. But considering that they peaked around 50k for paid early access, this is going to come in better than I actually expected. But player numbers are only a small part of the overall picture. All right, so let's highlight a few other interesting numbers here. First and foremost, number 2 in the top sellers is actually quite impressive. I'm sure that actually is counting just the free-to-play downloads as a sale, but whether it is or it isn't, number 2 in top sellers is quite important. The other number that I'm finding most interesting is that there's a 55% positive review score, meaning that most of the reviews are positive, and then a very close number is approaching that negative review count. I think this is, and I think this makes the most sense, namely because MMO hype tends to bring in MMO fans and also non-MMO fans, people who do not like MMOs, but they like to be included. They like to be a part of the hype cycle, or they're lying to themselves, telling themselves they like MMOs, and they're still chasing that high that maybe they had back in the day, whether they were, a teenager and had all endless amounts of time to play these games or whatnot. I don't know their individual story, but we see it time and time again. The chasing of a high that can never seem to be satisfied, and it comes out in the review score. Now, regardless of my personal opinions about Throne of Liberty, I liked the game, but the free-to-play nature of it makes me really hesitant to even want to spend time in the game. It actually has a negative impact, as opposed to if they just charge like $40 to buy the game. If it was a buy to play, I'd be more interested in it overall. But that's just my personal weirdness, right? You don't need to agree with it anyway. But we also know there's going to be a player numbers dip in the future, but it's not about the dip and what comes after the dip. Because focusing only on concurrent player numbers is the wrong way to go about it. It's like reviewing a game and calling everything about it woke. It's divisive, it's only a word that means different things to different people, and to be blunt, it's just lazy. That's why I also like to look at what the streamers are doing, because they also help tell us when the hype season starts and when it ends. Because hype is a really great way to grow as a content creator. And I just want to bring up this one chart here to kind of break it down. Sub 1,000 followers, that's the group that's trying to grow from the hype. That's the group that's trying to be discovered because people are generally kind of interested in maybe checking out the game. 1 to 10K followers is that's the group that is trying to, I guess, capitalize off the growth that they've already had on previous hype seasons and to try and make this a career. 10 to 100,000 followers, that's where you start to get into the real meat and potatoes. How much are they gathering in? How much people are interested in watching them? And then from there, obviously, you get into the top 1% of the 1% on the platform, and to see how this truly impacts. Now, overall, all games as a service games are going actually through some level of burnout and fatigue right now. MMOs are still actually a very niche product and game, and they also have to compete not just for your money, but also for your time. And I think that the lockdown had a very interesting impact on the state of the game for the MMO, namely that it led the MMO to its highest of highs as people were stuck at home, and to give them some degree of social life, but also after people were wanting to get back into the real world. And that brings me back to what Mrs. Stick said and her line about the 326,000 max player count. Here's what I'm watching for. What does this weekend look like? By the time this weekend rolls around, you'll get a good look at what players are continuing to play, because the game has been out for a week, at least if you count early access. So considering how some MMO players play, they'll be reaching the level cap and checking out the endgame content, and then deciding. Now, if the numbers this weekend don't break the concurrent cap, as most of us with jobs will actually have more free time to play, I'd call that a red flag to look out for, because people are either done doing everything that they wanted to do in this game, or there really wasn't a hook that was going to keep them coming in or coming back to the game outside of the free-to-play business model. What's working out in Throne of Liberty's favor? Well, obviously you have the newness factor, as within any MMORPG. I've seen MMO genre players described as locusts, always hungry and starving and moving from MMO to MMO, consuming absolutely everything about it and leaving nothing in its path, and then cheering on its downfall. But the newness factor is always fun to be kind of a part of a special time in MMO history. I was there as a good example of a phrase that people will say. Low barrier for entry obviously is working out, both in terms of the cost of the game, but it's going to feel pretty familiar. It's going to feel like an MMO. It's going to feel like you can see the inspiration from other MMOs brought in, which is very natural, because you run the risk of trying to be too different and players will not be interested. They will set it aside quickly because it doesn't necessarily speak the same language. We saw that happen greatly with Final Fantasy XIV's initial release, being a sandbox MMORPG that wasn't complete by any stretch of the imagination, but when you had the whole WoW movement with the success that World of Warcraft brought into the game, well, yeah, it didn't translate. Nobody was aware of that, and that's one thing that you can kind of see working against your game launch if it isn't too familiar. It's kind of a double-edged sword, kind of a curse, if you will. There's also going to be some bugs. We've experienced them, from time to time, but honestly, I'm not having any real major issues especially when I compare it to my time with the beta and even with the Korean version of this game. So I think overall it seems fairly smooth. I think the performance issues and other minor bugs will get worked out pretty quickly with enough time. And that kind of brings me back to the, you know, the dip in the chart that I grabbed early with the 13,000 concurrent. And that is obviously people who, you know, with a patch and whatnot, you see that number dip down. So it's like, it was an interesting time for me to actually capture that image, because it doesn't truly represent what's going on, but it will represent a number we will probably see some point in the future. Also, PvP, it's going to either be a major draw or a major thorn in your side, depending on what kind of gamer you are. PvP does help keep concurrent player counts up because of its dynamic nature. You're not waiting for curated content. It's what I call content that the developers design. And so you end up kind of creating your own fun. So if the game can facilitate that kind of community, PvP or not, where players are making their own fun, then that is something that you're going to see have lasting impact on retention when it comes to the state of the game. Will the game invite players back to check out the latest updates? Obviously, time will tell. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make this state of the game. You can actually expect more of these type of videos about Throne Liberty and other MMORPGs here in the near future. And I just want to thank you guys so much for the opportunity to talk with you guys today about it. But I think it's time that we wrap up with our message of hope. Weak men prefer the predictable harbor of a tyrant to the raging seas of liberty. Why do we need to talk about this, you might be wondering? And you can see here, unfortunately, teen and young adult self-deleting rates are unfortunately at their highest record. Now, recently, Asmongold talked about this, and I want to give him, a lot of, applause for that, because not talking about this is a part of the problem. And I'm not saying that you can go out to the internet and just, air out your issues. That can invite a lot of blowback. And honestly, if you're struggling right now, which we've all struggled, I've struggled deeply in the past, yeah, there's a good spot for it. But let's talk about this, because I know when I was in my 30s, I was dealing with a lot of anxiety and depression, and these dark thoughts would have a way of kind of creeping into your mind. And I think we also kind of live into a society right now that says that if you think it must be true. But I want to push back on that, because that isn't necessarily true. In the moment, it might feel like it is, but when you give things enough time and perspective, you can kind of look back and say, wow, that was a crazy period of my life, and wondering why you went through it. Anyway, I think also I want to say I'm kind of different. I think deep down inside all of us, we have this buried within each and every one of us, but I'm stubborn as hell, guys. My dad would often tell me when I was growing up, we never quit, which was kind of the family motto for me growing up. We actually have a different family motto which says, what God wills, I will. But I didn't learn that until everything went sideways in my life growing up. And let me just say, we never quit is a good motto when it comes to sports and never giving up on yourself, but it did negatively impact me when I was working for a company that was taking advantage of this motto. And it did surprise me that one day my dad actually looked at me and told me that I needed to quit that job. And that was kind of a big deal. It was a weirdly emotional day for me, if I'm being honest. But let's take it as a positive, that what my dad intended it to be. It wasn't until I was older that I learned that my dad quit football and walked off the team, turning down a full scholarship to play college football. And out of the 5 linemen that my dad was lined up with, 4 of them actually went on to play professionally in the NFL. My dad is and was a beast, if we're being honest. He was quite a thing. They called him a bear. But I learned from him the cost of regret and how that can eat at you and how it can really truly impact your subconscious. And I also learned about the power of forgiveness for others, but also forgiveness for yourself. I don't think there's a way to really avoid regret, full stop, other than just to leave it on the field. So if you're struggling with some dark thoughts, reach out. I'm 100% sure that a family member or friend would much rather hear your story rather than attend your funeral. But you are a beast. Inside you is a beast, powerful, capable, dangerous, and yet also peaceful. I want you to unlock that power within you. I'm not going to lie and say it's going to come easy, but that it all starts with the belief that it is in there and that you can overcome this. It's never a weakness to ask for help. So I want you to do it. You have to fight for yourself. No one's going to come in and save you. You got to make that conscious decision. I want to live. But if I can try to guilt you, maybe just a little bit, don't let a permanent solution to a temporary problem create regrets in others. And with that, I want to send you on your way. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord shine his face upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord look upon you kindly and give you peace. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.